tell me where the Ambassador Hotel is? I thought it was on this block, and I don't recognize it.
He's sending a copy of today's lecture to my dad, so I turned on this. So I have to be very careful what I say. Thanks for letting me talk to you. I changed the title of the talk Saturday, Bob's permission, so I am not talking about the aesthetic response of audiences, except at the end. Instead, I'm going to deal with the question of why is there music? And to begin with, I will follow the advice given me 31 years ago by my composition teacher, who said, the first thing you must always think about is your motive. Because without a proper motive, nothing can possibly go well. So I think it might be a good idea for me to discuss my motives for talking with you. Truthfully, if I didn't have very good motives, I would not be here. I am so swamped with private lessons and classes and laboratories and rehearsals and committees and all sorts of things. I am just there, trying to get up there. So I wouldn't be here unless I had very good motives. And I'd like to mention two of the motives. The first is the subject. On first thought, why is there music? Is, a blasé sort of thing. I asked some colleagues and said, why is there music? Just to see what they would say. And I got so tired of why not. That doesn't answer anything. It's a difficult question, and that question really is a challenge. A challenge that is very relevant to actually the core of my life, because basically at the very core of me is a dedication to music, and that's where I am. And if I can't answer why is there music, I really can't make much sense of anything. The second reason is I spend so much of my time, as is proper, dealing with the skills that are in service to art. Bowing, fingering, grammar and syntax of harmony, that sort of thing, that I really have to take some time to think about the larger questions, the aesthetic aspect of music, or why bother with grammar? Why bother with bowing? Why bother with fingering? All those things are servants of the main subject, which is art. And so, for very personal reasons, I need and I want to think about things like, why is there music? 5.5 years ago, in January 1984, I presented a lecture to this group that I had a tremendous amount of fun with. And the lecture was proposing a theory of music that would cope with the music of the entire planet. And it was a lot of fun. And I want to show you a little bit in retrospect what I did. Unfortunately, the thing about my definition was it really didn't deal with why is there music. Here's the definition. Music is an ordered sequence of sounds that creates a potentially captivating illusion of life. As an artifact, music reflects the existence of a specific culture. As art, it reminds us of the miracle of all things. And after I went through that definition, I then examined the various components of music with the idea of exposing people to music from all sorts of different cultures. And as we found out, I found out, the priorities of these various components differ violently from culture to culture. We take a lot of things about music for granted. And when you examine music of other cultures, we find out just how arbitrary our music is. Even pitch is arbitrary. But after all that, as fun as it was, I really didn't deal with the question of Why is there music? And before we travel down the road of the question, why is there music, I need to explore a little bit some of the other people that have been down that road. And the first person I have to explore is the person, the philosopher from whom you get the name of this group, Plato. I am irritated by Plato's tendency to favor censorship of the arts. I would not happily live in a culture which censors the arts. And if you have any difficulty in understanding where I'm coming from, perhaps a reference to the happenings of this Monday might help you understand why I am irritated with a culture that would like to censor the arts. I thought the title was funny because I couldn't decide whether I was, or one or the other. I decided I was both out and enraged. I have been thinking about that, and I have an opportunity to say something about this problem, and I would like to take the opportunity to say something about it. I have met some of the Board of Regents. The cello quartet, of which I am a member and the organizer, has played for several of the functions, and I've shaken their hands and talked with them. And I really think these people have a misunderstanding of their role, probably in good faith. Probably they don't understand that they've made a mistake. These people tend to think of their role as a corporate board for a corporation, and they make decisions that have to do with profit, that have to do with PR, that have to do with keeping the customers happy. And there's a reason for that. I think the people that select the Board of Regents have as their first requirement success in business. So many of these people, their main attribute is they're very, very successful business people. So of course, when they come to govern a university, they tend to think of this as a governing board that should be handled like a corporation. Increase profits, don't hack off the customers. And that's totally inappropriate from my viewpoint. Because a university is not about teaching a selected list of approved beliefs. A university is the exact opposite of that. It is about exploration, discovery. And in order to explore, in order to discover, you have to have the freedom to consider many different points of view, some quite opposing. If you don't have that freedom, you cannot be a university. So I think all this sort of business about censorship is just because these people really don't understand their role. What would be more appropriate for them is to encourage exploration of many different points of view. They should be encouraging us to see as many different points of view as possible, because only from that sort of thing do we get any good product. I really believe, personally, that censorship is a radical infringement of intellectual freedom. But all of that is in reference to why I am hacked off at Plato for favoring censorship of the arts. And I am more than hacked off at Plato about that. I think any artist would do well to avoid Plato's world. In the Republic, Plato attacks the arts as being mere imitators, third hand, of reality. And I find myself, as a musician, again being quite irritated with his use of illusions, the illusions of words. He uses the illusions of words to create the illusion of a rather bad dialogue to criticize the illusions formed by art. I find that rather bizarre. Now, in case you don't realize what illusions those dialogues are, I have taken the freedom of rewriting the dialogues in the form of a one-way telephone conversation. And what I have printed is the dialogue that are only the responses to Plato's witty remarks. Yes, Socrates, that I think is quite true. Quite so. Yes. Exactly. Yes. Proceed, etc., 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 etc. Would you accept a collect long-distance call from someone like Plato? I have a friend who talks a little bit like that, and no, I do not accept collect long-distance calls from someone like that. Enough said. I find the idea of using an illusion to criticize something else for being an illusion a little bit twisted a thought for me. And according to Confucius, that is translated or fabricated perhaps even by Ezra Pound, Confucius says, think no twisty thoughts. However, as much as I admire some of the Chinese master's sayings, I cannot accept his notion that unless all the musical instruments in a nation are in tune, the federal government will fall. I'll repeat that idea of his. Unless all of the musical instruments in a nation are in tune, the federal government will fall. Now, when I hear some out-of-tune pianos, I almost wish he was right. And furthermore, can you think of a better secret weapon to overthrow an unjust government? You sneak around and untune all the pianos, and then the government falls. No, I'm sorry. That at first thought just seems too bizarre a point of view. Not that bizarre when we think what it is. It's sympathetic magic. It's confusing having harmony with notes and harmony with government. And that sort of confusion of one type of harmony affects the harmony of the other makes no sense to me. That sort of primitive superstition of connecting two things that sound the same is found in Sir James George Fraser's Golden Bough, where you find countless cataloging of various primitive superstitions that say sympathetic magic works. If I do this, then this is sort of similar, so it'll do it to that. I'm sorry, life is too short for that sort of nonsense, I first thought. But then, on the other hand, I like doing that. On the other hand, Chinese is a pitched verbal language. And perhaps it is not quite as far-fetched. Although it's far-fetched, it's not quite as far-fetched, because if the instruments were tuned and the language was tuned to the instruments, it might make smooth communication. So it might make for better communication. I don't know. But still, to me, that's much too far-fetched an idea for me to bear. In the other authors that I've had a nostalgic trip reading for this lecture, I have seen two general, not mutually exclusive approaches. The first I would call the abstract approach that says that the meaning of music comes from the relationship of the sounds itself, or what I would call a referential type of meaning, when music relates to extra musical things like concepts or emotions. Those things are outside of music. Those are not mutually exclusive. My problem with the abstract approach is the abstract approach alone doesn't provide me with much of an incentive to even want to listen to music. It is, however, very useful in exploring the relationships in music. It's very useful to understand the grammar and syntax. We do that all the time. But it's not very inspiring. However, I find the referential approach interesting but very dangerous. And to consider how dangerous it is, I would like us to examine some of the thoughts of Tolstoy in an article called What is Art? Please forgive me, this happens in faculty meetings all the time. We are handed a memo and then it is read to us. I will try and read accurately. It is on this capacity of man to receive another man's expression, the feeling, and to experience these feelings himself, that the activity of art is based. Art is not the manifestation of some mysterious idea or beauty of God. It is not a game in which man lets off his excess of stored up energy. It is not the expression of man's emotions by external signs. It is not the production of pleasing objects, and above all, it is not pleasure. But it is a means of union among men, joining them together in the same feelings. Later he says, the stronger the infection with music, the better is the art. Speaking of it now apart from a subject matter, that is, not considering the value of the feelings it transmits. And the degree of infectiousness of art depends on three considerations. First, on the greater or lesser individuality of feelings transmitted. Second, on the greater or lesser clearness with which the feeling is transmitted. Third, on the sincerity of the artist, that is, on the greater or lesser force with which the author himself feels the emotion he transmits. So far, well, maybe. But then we get to the end, in which he compares a peasant song with Beethoven's, quote, 101st sonata. Oh no, Leo. Opus 101 means that is the 101st composition that he published. It does not mean that it is his 101st sonata. However, the song of the peasant women was real art, transmitting a definite and strong feeling, while the 101st sonata of Beethoven was only an unsuccessful attempt at art, containing no definite feeling and therefore not infectious. Later he says, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is considered a great work of art. I am compelled to conclude that this work belongs to the rank of bad art, for the music is exclusive and does not unite all of men. It unites only a few, dividing them off from the rest of mankind. Oh my. Oh my. He's a referentialist. He says emotion is the basis of art, and that communication of this emotion is a way of uniting men, and look where it leads him, to nonsense. But he's not the only person that's done that thing. That is exactly the same logic used by the police state in force at the end of Stalin's regime. The last decade of Stalin's rule, or more, they used exactly the same argument. They said, good art is socialist realism. Bad art is bourgeois formalism. Right? I mean, so what do we write? Well, it turns out that they couldn't define it too well, and so they had to make some decisions. They decided with instrumental music, there are no words to censor. Now see, if you have words, you can say, this is supportive of our regime, or this is not supportive. So it's easy to say, man, that's bourgeois formalism, trash it. Or, good for you, we'll give you a Lenin medal, because it's got words and we can tell. But what do you do with a sonata? They decided that if it had, get this, I mean, this really happened. If they had thematic development, it was what then happens to ba, 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 ba. No, you can't do that. Don't do the next part, because that's developing a motive. As if they weren't satisfied with that, they later said that with instrumental music, they're going to ban all of it unless it relates to words or unless it uses folk song type tunes. So they're left with nothing. Thank goodness. Our culture, at least, doesn't... Well, maybe I better go on. The idea of sharing emotions has other difficulties also. Because although we can measure some physical reactions to emotions, for instance, when we play music for people, it can and has measurably affected pulse, respiration, external blood pressure. It does delay the onset of muscular fatigue, and it affects the psychogalvanic response. I had to look it up. What is a psychogalvanic response? Well, it's an electrical current in the nervous system, and evidently, if you listen to music, you can get all buzzed up in your nervous system. So these things you can measure, but you can't measure or even compare subjective mental states. There's no way to measure them. Furthermore, even if you could measure them, it's been impossible to correlate even the physical responses to the actual stimuli of music. Everybody responds differently, and my life furnishes direct proof of this. For instance, about 2 years ago, I had to recatalog my records. What did I do? I discovered some of the very first LPs I ever played. Now, when I first played them, I overplayed them, so they're awfully worn. So I decided that I'd just listen to these first records because I loved them so much when I was studying music. No kidding. What a trip. Because I could recall my emotions when I heard them first, and yet if I compared my present emotions, they were quite different. I'm going to play one of the pieces for you. This is Delius, or part of one. I used to love this so much. It was outside, trees, blade of grass, clouds, and a good oboe player. That used to thrill me so much. Unfortunately, after having heard a lot of dead music, Delius sure seems like pale. The real thing is Debussy. Debussy was the man that invented all of these things, and Delius was really a pale imitator of that. And besides, that only has one theme. And if you've heard the first measures, you've heard the theme. And these days, I require a greater length of tune than that long. Although disco's fine. I was surprised with disco because sometimes one line is all there's to it. But at least there's a better beat with that than there is with Delius. My reaction to Delius has changed dramatically in my own self. Therefore, how can I expect a piece of music to have an automatic reaction with the way I feel? There's no direct connection. And furthermore, every time I play a brand new piece of music, particularly in the first week, my feelings go through all sorts of changes. Every time I work on a piece, as a matter of fact, every single rehearsal, my feelings towards that piece change. Sometimes it's not very fair because it depends on whether a fingering works as to what I feel about the piece. But as far as a direct correlationship between music and emotions, I don't buy it. I just don't see it. I don't see it in my life. I am very happy, however, with some aspects of referential theory, and that is the very useful categories of emotions made in India 500 years before Christ. These categories were originally designed for the theater and then were applied to all arts. These are the Nava Rasa, and they're very useful. All of the moods that people experience can be reduced to a basic 9 components and combinations thereof: erotic, comic, sorrowful, angry, heroic, frightened, disgusted, and as it says in the translation, wonderment and peace. Actually, they say, what is it? Disgustful. But I said disgusted or wonder and peace. I tested this, folks. I mean, dumb Swede that I am, I took my thesaurus, and I actually looked up the first 1,000 emotional words. I actually did this, Ed, I'm that dumb, to see if they would fit in these categories. And they do. I mean, I didn't find any that didn't fit in those categories, so, the Indians might have had a good point, I guess. Also, artistically, the idea of these emotions being communicated in their art probably works much better in their culture than it does in ours, because the audience is taught which emotions are associated with which scale. And in the program notes, they tell you, we are communicating this emotion and combined with this emotion. They tell you precisely what emotions they are communicating. So, if I were brought up in India as a little puppy on up, I imagine that when I heard a specific piece of music, I would at least know what emotion I was supposed to feel and might even feel that. But in our culture, we don't do that. And Beethoven didn't say, think such and such at this measure. Besides, I'm intrigued with that. How could I possibly disapprove of a culture that says every musician is partially a god? I mean, I'm not going to knock that type of culture. This illustration this guy has many heads and many hands because in every musician that exists, he exists. So I like their attitude towards music. Somehow that appeals to me, probably for personal reasons. But I must ask, even if this is all true, why are these emotions being generated and shared? What reason? I don't quite buy the Greek idea of catharsis, of purgating emotions by experiencing them deeply. I mean, for instance, why purgate joy? I don't want to get rid of joy. I want it to continue. It just doesn't make any sense to me. At this point, when I was starting getting very frustrated, I found it very useful to review some of the ideas of Sigmund Freud. And once again, my apologies. Would you rather read it yourself or have me read it to you? I'll read it, okay. Because maybe you can't see it. Okay. This is from Civilization and Its Discontents. And by the way, folks, if you haven't read late Freud, do. He won his Nobel Prize for literature. He did not win it for medicine. And I think justifiably he won it for literature. It's an interesting read. So if you're bored, read some late Freud. He also wrote a wonderful book on religion called The Future of an Illusion. But at any rate, he writes here, life as we find it is too hard for us. It entails too much pain, too many disappointments, impossible tasks. We cannot do with palliative remedies. There are perhaps three of these means: powerful diversions of interest, which lead us to care little for our misery. And I have seen that in visiting an old folks' home. There was one gal there that was bustling around trying to make everybody happy and comfortable, and she looked dynamite. And I was thinking that one act was probably keeping her from being as depressed as some of the other people looked. Let's see, the second one would be substitutive gratifications, which lessen this misery, and intoxicating substances, which make us insensitive to it. The substitute gratifications, such as art offers, are illusions in contrast to reality, but nonetheless satisfying to the mind on that account, thanks to the place which fantasy has reserved for herself in mental life. Yet art affects us but as a mild narcotic and can provide no more than a temporary refuge for us from the hardships of life. And in a wonderful, wonderful article that summarizes, that brings together a lot of Freud's ideas on art in his various writings, is by Richard Sturba. And I took some quotes from it. Our highest cultural activities and accomplishments also have their roots deeply implanted in the unconscious, whence they draw their dynamic force. The practice of art is an activity whose aim is to assuage unappeased wishes. Through the imaginative participation in the artist's infantile fantasy, the wishes of the person enjoying the work of art are also fulfilled. The imitation of reality in itself represents a primitive kind of mastery of reality, which is made possible by an exchange of psychic for actual reality. The technique of such mastery is magic. It is based on mistaking an ideal connection for a real will. And again, Freud had read the same book I had, so it must be a good book, which is Sir James George Fraser's Golden Bough. He then says the same magic tendencies which are found at the basis of a work of art are found as the basis of children's play. And like a child at play, the artist also creates a world of fantasy in the likeness of reality, which he takes in all seriousness and loads with enormous quantities of effective energy. Yeah, if the shoe fits, I guess I'll wear it. At any rate, I am a little bit... That gives me a little bit of difficulty because art isn't necessarily just an escape from unpleasant realities, although it seems to be used for that purpose frequently. But that doesn't mean that it's supposed to be used that way, and that is its purpose. For instance, if I use a screwdriver to stir a can of paint, that does not mean that that is the purpose for which that screwdriver was designed, and that has happened to me. Someone borrowed my screwdriver to stir a can of paint. And, all right, it didn't affect the screwdriver that much, but that's not what the screwdriver was designed for. At any rate, you can stir a can of paint with a screwdriver, but that doesn't mean what it's for. This leads me to my main point. Art indeed can point the way. It can inspire. It can awaken hopes and dreams. And my main point is that I think art can awaken the mind and senses. It is my belief that an almost totally predictable life and routine kills the mind. In Amarillo, those early years were amazing. I taught preschool students, grade school students, junior high students, high school students, college students, and adult students private cello lessons, and many of them beginners. And part of the cello lessons were whatever notes they learned, I asked them to compose little pieces in that. And I found to my absolute pain that as age progressed, creativity and adventurous just died. The adults were saying, oh, I can't do that. Well, this little 4-year-old, I gave him the notes he was playing, he wrote a tune. I am still using that tune in Strings Calls. It's First Banger song, and Jeff has played it. And it's not a bad tune. This is by a 4-year-old. And I said, okay, you're playing these notes, make up a tune with it. He did. You ask grade school kids, they can do it still. You ask junior high, and they certainly could do it. High school, oh, is this good? College, oh, what do I write? Adult, oh, I can't do that. I'm not creative. And it really pains me to find out that the older people got, actually the less creative they became. It worries me. We need art. We need literature. We need humanities. And yes, we need philosophy in order to keep the brain alive and well, and to keep us aware and productive. For me, the purpose of music is to awaken people who all too frequently lead lives dominated by obligation, routine, peer pressure, and all the things that kill you. We need the humanities, or otherwise we've got dead brains. Otherwise we'd be candidates for the Board of Regents. Art exists to remind us that life is vivid, awake, full of unseen possibilities for adventure and discovery. And yes, the relationships between the musical aspects can inspire you. You can take an absolute approach to music and get pleasure from that. And yes, you can just be thrilled to your very soul by referential aspects of music. But the main purpose is to awaken people. And I think with this illusion of life that music creates, when we re-enter reality, we will re-enter a reality with an awakened sense of discovery and perhaps an awakened sense of the unseen possibilities that exist. I have gone through in my life periods when I thought, I'm stuck. And then something happens. Something moves me, some work of art usually, or some book, or something happens, and I have a totally new attitude towards life. It's as though there were possibilities there I hadn't even considered, and I thought there were no possibilities. If you ever get into an impasse or a dilemma, try art, or literature, or philosophy, and then go back to the problem, and you'll probably look at the whole thing with a much greater awareness of possibilities you hadn't realized existed before. I strongly recommend this, and that's my theory of art. From the mechanism that empowers music to awaken this ability, I appreciate some viewpoints mentioned in a book by Leonard Meyer called Emotion and Meaning in Music. Doesn't mean I buy everything he says, but he has some very valuable ideas I'd like to share with you. He says that the main mechanism that makes music work is expectation. And truthfully, I think he's right that what happens is we are culturally trained and we have distinct expectations about what is going to happen in a piece of music, which are played with. And at great expense, I brought my piano here. $23. And I would like to demonstrate that. Are you ready? Notice one finger. hear it? You know, in a lesson, we discovered what was and that's cultural. For instance, when I play this, no, right? And that these expectations produced by the sounds are directly linked to playing with the energies that produce the emotions that you feel. By skillfully delaying resolutions, you produce this tension. And as an example of this mechanism of expectation and surprise, I would like to share a tape of a live performance of this most unusual musician named Bobby McFerrin. This one is called Everyone Together Now, and it was taped in 1985. Audience participation.
You people out in Radio Land, repeat after me. Can we hear it? We got it? Go for it. We hear you. We hear you. Together.
That's a pretty good illustration of the attributes that Leonard Meyer feels empowers art, and I tend to agree with him. He also points out very ably that expectation, this expectation that Bobby was playing with, also plays a role before the music even begins, because listeners bring belief in the effective powers of music to the concert, and they set up a predispositional condition that is very, very favorable for these expectations being fulfilled. Wow! Free tickets to Bobby McFerrin? I'll go! Wouldn't you? You know, and after hearing that, you say, this is going to be a gas, this is going to be a gas, I can't wait. And you go, and even before Bobby McFerrin has even made an appearance, you're sold. You know, there's a lot of pressure on him to do well, but, you know, that sort of thing, the expectations you bring to a concert, they already affect the concert before you've heard a single sound. I was reminded a little bit about North Indian music because they have an instrument that they call a drone. I play the drone. It's a tanpura. And a tanpura is just a simple instrument that provides a harmonic atmosphere. I have just a little short recording of a tanpura. You can hear a little bit of it. And this is the background. This is the background. At any rate, that background is part of the atmosphere with which it's today. We call it, like the minute that sound starts, that magic. I had troubles when I learned about it because there's a lecture by Ravi Shankar that's supposed to be very helpful. And he said, the tanpura, a drum instrument that creates silence mafia. Creates silence mafia. Now look at silence mafia. A glossary, a book on Indian ragas. It's not fun, silence mafia. You don't have it spelled or anything, and then I suddenly strange thing is, the last time I saw him, a month before he died, we had discussed that very thing. And he still hadn't done it, so his collection's dispersed. But at any rate, from Ed, starting in 1965, I got quite an earful on Aboriginal people. And a very curious thing happens in those ceremonies with music. They, supposedly to naive Westerners, they imitate various animals, totem animals, like somebody will dance the dance of emu. And Ed said he was handy because these people do not imitate. They actually come. That it's quite uncanny. They are no longer imitating that animal, they become them. For the Aboriginals, particularly in Arnhem Land, there's a spiritual world called Dreamtime, which is the real world. And it's the world of the spirits. And when they dance emu, they enter Dreamtime. They enter a world that is removed from this world. And that sort of expectation of entering a completely different world, I find more verification for the power of music. I do need to get on with this because time's getting on, so I'll move perhaps more quickly. Because art has many levels of content, it has many hooks and many puzzles which serve to ensnare listeners even further, to captivate continued interest. You can hear a piece of music you like a lot, and there's something puzzling about it, so you'll listen again. Or there's something that you just never got tired of hearing that one little phrase, play it again. And so you hear it again. That's one of the signs that music has many levels. There are pieces of music that I have been teaching for 26 years, that I myself have played for 30 years, that I am still not at all tired of, that I love. A student right now is working on phraseology that I first started playing in 1957. I still love that piece. It's a sign And every time I work on it with somebody or play it myself, I get more nourishment out of that piece of music. It's a sign that, yeah, music and the other arts is capable of many levels of listening. And also, music may serve many purposes outside of awakening. That doesn't mean that's its original purpose. For instance, and this will make Leo Tolstoy do it. Yes, music can serve to unite large groups of people. For example, Igor Stravinsky. Igor Stravinsky. I would like, through transparencies, to go through some of the other uses of music that exist. There's the obvious one of using music for religious services. I would like you to notice that both in heaven and on earth, matching outfits today, there seems to be a dress code in both places. Besides that, it unifies people in thinking something, but there is another type of religious ceremony that intrigues me even more. In addition to praising God, in this particular culture, music is a means of communicating with gods. This is the Ewi people of Ghana, and they have a thing they call possession music. And it seems that their gods like to dance. And their gods also understand drum language. So the drummers, while they are drumming and people are dancing, are calling the gods, and the gods, if they like the drumming or the dancing, come and possess various people. You can hear the gods' arrival on this, because when various people scream and start dancing more wildly, that means they are being possessed by a god. The drummers then start using specific language which communicates with that specific god about the requests of the people. And here's a recording of these people. A short possession ceremony. Hear that scream? an unusual use of music. There are also the usual types of music making in the Renaissance. One could call this love songs, I suppose. Although in the distance there seemed to be some dancing going on, I think the main thing here is sort of love songs. There's also always been some sort of house music, although the cellist here looks no more happy, or a string bass player looks no more happy than these cats playing the catboard. Also, family music is not restrained to unfamiliar families. This is a romantic version of music making going on in Bach's time. I think the most interesting thing is the cat and the ball in that one. Also, I found some of these old transparencies. I just had to share them because they're so fetchy or something. At any rate, music can also be education. Although I can't imagine an ensemble with a drum, a trumpet, and a violin and a piano. Also, there's stuff about music at holidays. This is obviously a Christmas holiday. There's also music that occurs for social dancing, which is somewhat bizarre. There's also entertainment music. Although this is over 100 years old, I think I recognize some of these guys. They're still around. There's also music for earning a living, like begging. There's also music for theater. Well, that's a kind of theater, Punch and Judy, right? She has the worst job. There are marching bands that even make football games interesting. Although these guys look a little something, I don't know. I have actually, they sound like these guys, and they're great. And there are all sorts of other bands. For instance, would you entertain this band in your home? I'm not sure. In other words, there's a huge variety of music. One of the things we take for granted in music is concerts. I don't know whether you realize this, but public concerts are a very, very recent development. Non-liturgical, that means non-church concert, became significant in Europe only in the Renaissance. And even then, the patronage was by the ruling classes. Concerts were given for the upper class. And some civic bodies. The reason for giving it was because it provided pleasurable relaxation, and it was good public relations. The first public concert in England was in 1664. The first public concert of instrumental music in England was 1672. Most of the orchestras that we think of as being lasting forever, no, they're just a little over 100 years old. This whole thing about the whole idea of public concerts is very new. The first virtuoso that we would recognize as sort of like equivalent of today's rock star was this strange man. This is a duplication of a painting of Paganini. And perhaps the most famous of all, here not playing piano, is Franz Liszt. He was the first piano virtuoso. He played the first public piano concert about 1840. He was also a conductor, shown here. Once again, when we start talking about concerts, the behavior of audiences is definitely covered by arbitrary conventions. For instance, applause. We use it to frame a performance, to welcome the performer, to thank them for a good performance, to indicate either warmth of response or a lack of interest. And sometimes you hear applause, it's merely just like going through the social convention. But according to an article, according to a sentence by that world-renowned authority, L.M. Boyd, in the Stillwater newspaper, the best part of that newspaper was me. He says that in theaters of old Rome, clapping was the equivalent of booing. I can well believe that, and one of the reasons that I can believe it is because my good friend Gwen Powell had a most unexpected cultural shock when she played a concert tour of China. She played in Beijing, and she also played in Canton. In both places, in Canton, they had an audience of 3,000. And they came out to play, and everybody in the audience was talking full voice while they played. At the main conservatory of music, even the teachers were talking full voice the way I am talking right now. Everybody was talking in Canton. These 3,000 people brought food, and they were all talking and eating food and passing food around because the convention in that society is music is background to talk and eat food. Gwen was steaming. She was just furious. But cultural conventions are different in every culture, and for them that was just perfectly normal. I don't know. I do know about the role of musicians towards audiences. I really believe that a musician should do everything they can to promote awakening, to promote turned on, plugged in, participatory music. And as far as audiences are concerned, I always, as usual, have advice. My particular advice is we're living in a very blessed age. Thanks to the invention of the phonograph, thanks to the invention of radio, thanks to the invention of all these things for recording music, we now live at a time in the history of music when you can hear more music than has ever been heard before from more different historical periods, from more different types of cultures than has ever before been possible. I mean, it is possible for me in Stillwater to hear more and better orchestras than Mozart heard in all of his lifetime. I mean, we should be turning out the world's greatest, the greatest musician the world has ever seen right now, from what's available to us. For instance, just consider what's available in Stillwater. That was a dream I had one day that I'd let die. But I thought, wouldn't it be neat? Because never before in the history of music has all of the musical activity of any community been documented. So neat to have everybody in the city during 3 days or something record what music they listened to have a record of what was played on the radio, to have a record of what records were in everybody's collection. All the musical activities that went on in the Stillwater, and gosh, it would take the rest of your life to catalog all of the types of music going on, all of the public concerts in churches, in Boy Scout troops, in taps. I mean, everything that went on musically in just a little town like Stillwater, it's amazing. No culture that I know has ever documented the various types of music that go on in it. So, we really don't know that much about the music in any town in any period. But I bet you that if we documented the amount of music in even one band, it would be quite an earful. I would suggest to audiences that since we have so much music, find new kinds of music. Don't give up easily. I must admit that I have listened to music I don't know how to put it, but I've listened to music from so many different cultures. It's incredible. And the hardest type of music for me to hear, almost, was country music. But I found a way. I got the Smithsonian collection of classic country music, and it is arranged chronologically. And I listened in one weekend twice to that collection from the beginning to the end, and I could relate to it perfectly. I can now relate to D-I-V-O-R-C-E, etc. perfectly, because it started with music in the Appalachian Mountains that was directly related to Elizabethan ballads. They sound exactly like Elizabethan ballads. Well, I can relate to those, and when you follow along the various influences that came into that, it's very easy to follow. So now, I am a certified listener of country music. I can listen and enjoy it. So when I go to a truck stop, all right, no problem. So I have encountered the most difficult types of music on our planet and even been able to relate to them. I would suggest that you try a new type of music constantly. Try a new type of music each month and don't give up. Keep trying. I do want to say that as far as a musician is concerned, a classical musician, silence is the canvas we paint our sounds. And one of the reasons I find it difficult to attend public concerts anymore is because maybe it's because of the music at home, that when music's on you can talk a lot. But for me, I'm trying to get into the sounds on stage, and it's really hard when people behind me are chattering, etc. From a musician's point of view, we need silence in order to play. One of the things about Sertine Center that people don't realize is architecturally, if you sit against the back wall, everything you say is audible on stage because of the acoustics of that building. And it is most disturbing to be on stage and hear somebody mention something totally unrelated while you're playing or while you have a rest. But I assure you, if you try that experiment, have someone go up against the back wall and whisper, and you will hear that on stage because of the way that dang building's built. So there's no way really to keep from being distracted by that. I would suggest to an audience that they try and be aware of various things. In almost every culture, highness and lowness of pitch is a good way to plug in the music. Following the breathing of the melody, because almost all melody is based on vocal melody, and one of the things about singers is they have to breathe. So melodies usually breathe. They breathe with it. You can follow form. Form is a very simple thing to follow, and I think that in the other lecture. Essentially, you have the ideas of a statement, and you have an idea of a continuation, you have an idea of contrast to that, and you recognize things when you relate to that. In fact, learning as much as you can about the music is the ideal way to relate to it. I must end, however, with a couple of things. And the first is a comment on a phenomenon known as background music. It's found everywhere, in social events, bars, restaurants, TV and radio commercials, bands at football games, elevator music, phone music while on hold, wedding music, receptions with music, doctors and dentists' offices, etc. I think with all music, moderation is important. If you listen too much, too frequently, you're deadening the ability of your mind to listen vividly. And unfortunately, you get in the habit of tuning such stuff out. If I'm with something like that in a safe, Homeland store, I tune it out, I don't listen. And here I am, a musician, practicing not listening. It's really hard. I resent also the fact that this music is being used to manipulate me emotionally for profit. That is not a motive I approve of. I really believe that background music is anti-music and it's anti-art, and I would like to see all of it wiped out. If somebody needs it, give them a set of headphones and a Walkman at the front of the store and let them walk through to the swoopy beat, but don't put it in my ears, thank you. Just because music can be used for that does not mean that that is the purpose of music. And for my last example, I would like to once again to prove that just because you can use the music for that, that is not the purpose of music. Here is party music, celebrating the acquisition of a valued object that can be sold for money. They got this object and they're really happy, and so they're having a party to celebrate that because they plan on selling it. This comes from the upper reaches of the Amazon River in Ecuador. Unfortunately, the object whose acquisition they are celebrating is their neighbor's head, which the partiers will shrink and then sell to tourists as a shrunken head. And these people were recorded right after they had a surprise party for one of their neighbors. No kidding. In this culture, there are no friends. You go armed everywhere you go. But they had a surprise party for one of their neighbors, and they are now singing and dancing around the head of this neighbor, saying, "We're going to party with you till dawn. Then we're going to shrink you and sell you." Here it is. For real. One of the amazing things about the music of this culture is there is no... Music is an illusion. And by listening to it, you enter into a world so that when you re-enter reality, you enter reality with a heightened sense of possibility.